Hello everyone, welcome to my next video on the St. Louis Rapid and Blitz tournament. Today I just wanted to go over some of my favorite games over the Rapid section, so yeah, let's just jump right into it. Okay, for this first game I have Pragnananda Rameshbabu versus Vincent Keimer, and this is a very interesting matchup stylistically as well because Prag's obviously a very attacking modern player, while Vincent's a more solid positional player with obviously Peter Letko, very well-known positional player as his coach. So yeah, let's just jump right in. So Prague opens with d4, Vincent opens with knight f6, we have c4, e6, knight c3. This is the Nimzo Indian. This is known to be a very sharp and well-known line, has lots of theory behind it, and it's very, very popular, especially in the Grandmaster level. So we have bishop b4, e3. This is kind of the main line right now for the white side, and white wants to play bishop d3 and knight e2 and develop like this, castle, and maybe try to push for this e4 move. And this e4 square is essentially the name of the game in this opening, because if black gets good access to e4, as it does right now, then the game's kind of in the balance and anything can happen. But if white gets access to e4, then black's pieces are going to be kind of misplaced, off sides, and white just has a huge space advantage. So black plays c5. This is a very typical opening move. Bishop d3, knight c6, knight e2, d5. This kind of trying to transpose into like a Tarrasch variation with with this type of pawn structure. A lot of pawn tension, and these normally lead to isolated queen pawn positions for either white or black, where one side tries to attack the isolated queen pawn while the other side tries to push their pawn and get an advantage. So we have Prague taking on d5, Vincent taking back, Prague castling. So then we have castle, a3, and this move c4, which is a very important move in this position because, say, in this position, if you try to gambit this pawn on c5, like you'll see in many type of positions, white can just take, and white is hanging on to the c5 pawn with this move b4, and this is just a healthy pawn advantage. It's not one of those positions where black can maybe try to gambit the pawn, get the bishop back, and try to start an attack, or they can't win this pawn on c5 very easily with moves like queen e7 and moving the bishop and then playing a5, because this bind of a3, b4, c5 is just way too powerful in this position. So going back to the game, we have after a3, we have this move c4, closing the position and trying to kick out this bishop. We have bishop c2, bishop a5, f3, going for this e4 break and trying to open the position for white's two better placed bishops, maybe not more active. We have h6, bishop d2, and the reason white didn't play e4 immediately is just that it's a little too early, his pieces are a little too loose, because if you play e4 right now, black can, first of all, they can just take on e4, and then they can just play, for example, rook e8 or bishop b6. And the problem is for white is that this d4 pawn is just way too weak. Because if you try to defend it with bishop e3, there's this move knight g4, attacking this bishop and putting more pressure on this d4 pawn, because you can't move it off this diagonal or else you lose the pawn. And just to show a sample line, if white tries to hang on to the bishop with this move queen d2, black can play take, take, and knight takes d4, and you have this pin lined up, and it's a very terrible position for white. So going back to the game, that's why we have bishop d2, and Vincent plays rook e8, trying to put pressure on this e3 pawn and trying to control this e4 square. And here Prague plays queen c1, just trying to support this e3 pawn so that if black ever takes, you can maybe take with the bishop, you can maybe take with the knight, you have the option to be flexible. After rook b8, we have bishop e1. This is another reason why Prague played queen c1. He wants to re-maneuver this bishop to the h4 square, to a diagonal where it's a lot more active compared to this d2 square. And now we have b5, bishop h4, and g5. So this is kind of where the game starts to get a little spicy, because as you can see, black is playing a lot of committal moves, playing g5, b5, and it's very weakening, but it's also very aggressive and very potent in most scenarios. Because after white plays bishop g3, you can play this move rook b7, trying to play rook e7, targeting this pawn. You have this b4 break, getting onto the queen side. And if white's not careful and white doesn't play accurately, they can be dead lost in just a few moves. So Prague decides to play this move b4, which is very interesting, giving Vincent a pass pawn on c4, a connected pass pawn, that is. And black here plays bishop c7, which is given as a mistake by the computer. In this position, apparently it was best to play c takes b3 en passant, and after bishop takes b3, then you play rook b7, trying to go for this pawn and leaving this bishop on this diagonal. And I would assume Vincent just didn't go for this because the pawn on c4 normally is just such an asset in these kind of positions that if you can play like bishop c7 and a5, the position does look extremely good for black, but there's a reason why it isn't, and we'll see in the game. So let's just go to the fast forward. So we have bishop c7, but after you take and play queen d2 in this position, you can see that this pawn in b5 is extremely weak, and this bishop for black is essentially out of the game because it really doesn't have any prospects for the future because it's blocked by this d5 and b5 pawns, and it can't really get out on this diagonal because g4, h3 are covered, f5 is covered, e6 is staring at a pawn, d7 is staring at a pawn, and c8 is just its own square. So we have rook e7 and e4, this pawn break, a very nice pawn break by Prague, very nicely timed. And now this is where times start to get a little desperate for Vincent. He only has 5 minutes compared to Prague's 11. And in this position, he plays take, and he plays knight takes e4, which is entailing a classic rook sacrifice that black's trying to do. And the idea is that after you take, you're trying to go after this d4 pawn, and now your bishop has a very, very nice diagonal. And there's actually some really nice compensation because white's pieces aren't very well coordinated yet, and this pawn in c4 is extremely strong. So we have d5 in this position by Prague, just trying to safeguard this pawn. We have bishop e6, trying to put pressure on it. And this move is a bit of a mistake, but it's kind of hard to blame Vincent for playing this move because it's just so natural trying to win the pawn and putting a pin on the queen. But after just rook d1, you're protecting this, it's a fork, and it's a very complex position. So we have bishop d5, and the point is that if you take, then you can take on e2, but that's not forced. White can play this move knight c3, which looks like is winning the bishop, but black has this move rook d4. In this position, Prague decides to play queen e3, just offering trade of rooks. After rook d3, take, we have a position where material is a bishop and a pawn for a rook, but this rook is going to get extremely active. This bishop does look strong for right now, sitting on this nice diagonal, but it's getting dislodged very soon. And if white can get a queen trade like they're looking for right now, this position is basically game over and winning for white. So for that reason, Vincent plays this move queen b6. After rook f2, bishop c4. And rook f2 was the only move because if you play king h1, then there's this move bishop c4, which is a skewer between the queen and the rook. And the reason it doesn't work now is obviously after rook f2, bishop c4 is just not a skewer. But we have bishop c4 anyways, queen d6, and queen e3. Now this queen e3 move is really nice, getting very, very active, and I think Prague missed this move, especially with this time pressure. And the point is that you're sacking the knight temporarily, but it's not really a sack because you have queen e1 as your follow-up. And the point is after rook f1, you can just take the rook and it's checkmate. So we have queen d2 in this position, safeguarding this square in e1 and offering a queen trade. We have queen e5, centralizing the queen, rook f3, trying to just get out of this somewhat bind of a position, maybe play rook e3, rook e1, trying to create some more room for this king, maybe play h3, and just solidify his position. So we have knight d4 attacking this rook, we have rook e3 and queen f6. Now this position is getting a little more complex than Prague probably wants it. Even though the engine says it's +2, it really doesn't feel like it, especially with the knight rerouting to f4. So we have rook e1, queen b6, setting up a discover check such as knight f3, king h1, and knight e6, just getting this knight to f4, where it will be a pest for the rest of the game. Because you can never really dislodge it with g3, because then this bishop is just going to be a beast. So we have knight e4, knight f4, queen c3, and now white's also trying to eye the weak squares around black's king, and just put pressure and maybe even try to checkmate. So we have king a7, just sidestepping everything. The point is after knight f6, there's just king g6, just dislodging this knight. So we have this position. So after bishop c4, Yeah, so after king h7, knight f6, king g6, knight d7, this is where Prague starts to go a little wrong because you can see the time is also getting to him, and he's trying to play knight e5 in this position, which would be a great move. But the problem is black has this move queen f2, and white really doesn't have time to play knight e5 and take because there's checkmate being threatened on the next move, not queen e2 but queen g2. So we have knight e5, king h7, and queen g3, the only move in this position. And the point is you're defending this, you're defending this, and you're just solid for right now. But this position is very complicated and it's not easy to win at all for Prague. So we have queen d2 in this position, and the problem is now you can't even play knight c4, or you could, but it's slightly risky because after you take again with c4, you have your queen guiding your pawn all the way down to c1, and this plan is actually very hard to stop, and with a limited amount of time, it'd be very tricky for Prague to hold that position. So you have knight f3, queen b2, and h4. Queen b2 I don't think was the best move because this h4 move is really powerful, that you're trying to get at this king and trying to open up the position. And after f6, just trying to solidify this pawn in g5. White can play take, and rook e7 check, just going after the king. After king g6, the only move, because if you move back, you can just play, for example, a sample line I guess could be just rook takes a7, because there's no threat against white's king, and there's no way for black to really improve the pieces. Maybe bishop d5, but that doesn't really do much. You're always threatening knight g5 shenanigans. Not now, because the bishop on d5 would be helping attack this pawn in g2, but it's a possibility nonetheless. So after rook e7, we have king g6 and knight to h4, the only move to secure an advantage for white. King h6, knight f5, and Prague now is just repeating to gain time on the clock. And after he repeats 2 times, he plays this only move, queen g4. And the point is, you're threatening rook g7 checkmate, you're threatening knight h4, and you keep guarding all your pieces, and everything is safe for right now. Now, the only defensive move for Vincent is to sack the queen temporarily and play queen takes g2. So the point is, as you'll see, is queen takes g2. You can play take, and the point is that if white takes, you can just take this knight. And this position is a draw, because even though white can win this pawn, it's very hard to get these pawns rolling, and black has a very easy plan with f5, f4, f3, and g4, and getting these pawns rolling. So going back, after queen g2 take, white plays this move knight d6, however. And the point is that this bishop is getting dislodged from this powerful c4 square, and then you can start winning these pawns. It'll be rook bishop in 2 versus rook bishop versus knight bishop in 2, and it's a very interesting endgame. After bishop d5, we have knight takes b5. There are checks that the black knight can give, but none of them are powerful at all. So black plays g4, try to get this pawn rolling down to g3 and go down. And this plan is actually extremely hard to stop. So after king h2, we have f5, rook takes a7, and f4. And as you can see, these black pawns are a lot closer to queening than white's pawns. So we have knight c3, g3, king g1, bishop f3. And the problem for black in this position is that you want this square on f3 to be for your knight. You want to reroute your knight this way. But the problem is, after white took on a7, he took all your bishop squares on this diagonal besides f3. There's no other safe place to go, because if you play bishop c6, there's just b5. So in this position, Vincent opts for bishop f3, b5, knight e1, and the point is you want to go knight d3, knight f2, knight h3. And this is a draw. But this maneuver is extremely hard to come up with, especially with low time pressure, and because it's very unintuitive. Because after b6, Vincent misses it. Bishop c6, he plays bishop c6. But knight d3, if you let the engine sit for a bit, it is a draw. And the only, I guess, winning move for Prague in this position is this move knight d1, which is just kind of insanity play. And the point is you're just stopping knight f2. And the point is that if you take, you have enough time to play b7. So after knight d3 and knight d1, which is an insane move, Vincent most likely should play knight c1, And the point is you can play knight e2 and g2 check, and that's the point. And no matter what white does, you're always kind of threatening to maybe like sack, maybe not sack your knight, but like play knight e2, take, and play f3, f2. And these are kind of the plans and positions that black really likes in these positions. But this maneuver of knight d3 and knight f2 are extremely rare. And personally, I've never seen one like this before. This is the first time I've seen it, and they're just really hard to come up with over the board. So instead, Vincent misses it and plays bishop c6, which allows rook c7, knight f3, king f1, and Prague can just dance his king away. And since his pawns are like close enough to promoting, he can just like sack his rook for these two pawns or sack his knight for these two pawns, and he'll be a-okay. So after knight h2, king g1, knight f3, king f1. Problem is knight h2 is almost a draw, because after knight d3, knight f3, you have to play king d1 or else, because king f1 is default. But the problem is after you play king d1, you can play this move bishop a4, which is an insanely cool move. The point is that right now you want to play this move g2, but you can't because the bishop will be taken with check. So you play bishop a4, take, and now you can play g2 because you can't play rook c6 because after, like, say king f5, there's no way to stop this pawn. While on this line, if you play g2, you can play take here and knight e2. The point is to distract this knight from this e2 square so that you can just sneak this pawn forward. And this is why this game was so beautiful. It was so tactical with just a few seconds left. But instead, Vincent plays f3. And the reason why this is a blunder is because he just missed that you can take the bishop with check. And the point is after king f5, you have this move knight d1. And after knight d1, the game is just over because you can never play f2 in this position because you always just take. And if you try to sneak in g2, you have this move knight h3. And that's the heartbreaking thing for Vincent, is that he's so close to winning this position, or at least drawing it, but it just barely doesn't work out. So the game goes on for a little bit after knight g4 and king f1, but this game is essentially over because you just have b7, b8 for Prague. Okay, going to the next game. Yep, so this is a game between Java Krasnodar, the World Championship Challenger, and Jordan van Forest. Now, both of these players are extremely strong, but obviously Sindrov is in much better form, as he's been in incredible form for the last few months. So let's just jump right into it. So we have c4, knight f6, knight f3, g6, knight c3, bishop g7, e4, d6, d4, just transposing into King's Indian structure, excuse me. And after castle, bishop e2, this is like the orthodox Spain line. This is very sharp. Thousands of games have been played on this line. There's a lot of moves in this position like e5, c5, knight a6, c6, and the list goes on. I'm not very well versed in the King's Indian, but that's how far my knowledge goes. But so Van Forest, Jordan opts for knight a6, which is a subtle move. The point is you want to play e5 and get this knight to c5. So we have bishop e3, e5, d5, knight g4, trying to win access to this knight c5 square by taking this bishop. So we have bishop g5, f6, bishop h4, and knight h6. Now this is all theory, it's very complicated theory, and there's a lot of intricacies in these positions, and it's kind of hard to explain why knight h6 is the best move. It's most likely that you don't want white to start playing h3 and g4 in some positions, and if you can just stop that by playing a prophylactic move such as knight h6, then it's probably the best move. So we have knight h6, knight d2. The point of knight d2 is it's a very common remaneuver in this type of position where you want to play f3, bishop f2, remaneuvering bishop to f2 so that it supports your b4 and c5 breaks in the future. So we have g5, bishop g3, and f5. And this f5 move is very nice for black because obviously it's threatening f4, and therefore you kind of need to take this pawn, or else, because if you play h3, f4, this position is not something white really ever wants to play, because you're giving the King's Indian player everything that they want. So after f5, you have take, and now you have access to this d4 square, which can be quite nice in some positions. So we have king's at castle, and now b6, just trying to develop the bishop like this, or trying to even gain control of c5, excuse me, that's probably the reason. We have a3, trying to go b4, we have knight c5, and after b4, we have knight d7, just rerouting this knight from a6 to d7, where it has more attacking prospects on the king's side. So we have knight d4, a5, challenging this pawn on b4, and we have c5, breaking the position down. So Jordan opts to take on b4, a takes b4, and then take on c5, just breaking down the king side, opening it up completely, the queen side, excuse me. And after bc5, knight c5, knight c5, dc5, we have the type of position where black has an extra pawn, but they're extremely compromised, extremely weak. And this pawn on c5 really can't be counted as an extra pawn because after, for example, a move like knight e4, which I think was played in the game, yeah, this pawn is just dead. It can't like live any longer because no matter what you do, white can just take. And they have this target on c7, and they have a target on e5. And this is what the game is gonna go down to, is if white can win these pawns, put enough pressure, and then push this d pawn and win the game. So we have knight d4, bishop c4, trying to play d6, trying to activate this bishop, king h8, and knight takes c5. Now we're keying into this weak e6 square that black weakened. So after queen d6, we have queen takes d4, which is a very nice move in this position. It's actually really funny that you can play this. And the point is that after you take, well, it's trade. Like, that's the entire point. But I don't think this is the best move. It may have been the flashiest move, but I don't think it was the best one because, well, you have way more space in this position for white, and therefore you shouldn't trade pieces because then black's pieces, if they don't have space, that they're more clumsy and they can't do stuff. But now, since you have traded pieces, these bishops can be pretty powerful. And after this knight e6 move, I think Sinjarov kind of misevaluated this endgame. They thought, he may have thought that this pawn at e6 is a lot stronger than it actually is. But after this move, bishop e5, I think that this position would be a draw, and it's pretty easy to hold for black, especially with moving your king to f6, moving this rook to b8, and getting this active counterplay. And especially with the time, both having a lot of time, this should be a quite simple draw. But instead, Jordan plays rook e8. This is a more passive move, a more passive defense, which obviously it's not a bad move at all, but I probably would have played bishop e5 myself, but I'm obviously not as good as Jordan, so in hindsight, it doesn't matter. So bishop d5, rook e7, g3. Now this g3 move is actually quite important in my opinion, because you're getting a look for your king inside a light square instead of like h3, for example, which would be on a dark square, the same color square as your opponent's bishop, but also facilitates this move f4, which is extremely restricted to this bishop, and it's just a great move in general. So we have bishop e5, king g2, king g7, and rook c6. Now rook c6 is a very nice move. You're just infiltrating this position, you're putting pressure on d6, and what white is going to try to do is try to put pressure on this d6 and d4 pawns, dislodge his bishop, and then start making this pawn a real thorn in black's position. So we have, after rook f5, we have bishop c4, g4, and this g4 move is a blunder. And I know the computer doesn't say so, but this is essentially the end of the game, or the beginning of the end, because you're fixing a pawn on your opponent's, on the same colored complex as your opponent's bishop. And now Javakir has a very easy time playing bishop e2, h5, again fixing another pawn in this same color complex, and it's just a huge positional advantage for Javakir. So we have h3 in this position, and after take, another reason why g4 wasn't good is that you're allowing white to get this kingside majority, which is always wanted. And now this f4 move and g4 move are extremely potent because they're restricting these pieces and they almost have nowhere to move. Because if you look at this bishop, if you play f4, the only plausible move is bishop f6. And after bishop f6, the rook can't even get back on that file after g4. So it's a very terrible position for black. So you have rook f3, bishop d5, rook c3, trying to trade trying to trade rooks. We have f4, the move that I've been talking about. And the point is that you just want to restrict this bishop and take space, and maybe connect these two pawns together with move f5. So you have take, bishop f6, bishop d7, and this bishop d7 move kind of kills this rook because the rook can't move anywhere. Like, it physically can't go anywhere without like dying. So we have h5, king g2. h5 and king g2 are given like inaccuracies, but in an endgame like this, it's very hard to like always play accurately. I can't blame either players for playing these kind of moves because they're very natural as well. King f8 is also very natural, and the evaluation doesn't even shift that much between king f8 and king g6. So I guess the point is that after rook h1, you're winning this pawn essentially, but oh, that's not what you want to play. But black can play rook h7. I guess that was the point. But I think in this position, Jordan misses move g4. And this is a very, very important move because you're getting g5 and f5 and getting 3 connected pass pawns, which will be the end of the game. So after we have d3, we have g5, and then we have f5. And then these 3 pawns are way too much for this bishop and for this rook and this king to handle. So after king f6, we have this move f6. After take. The reason Jordan has to take it after f6, if you like even try to play a move such as king d8, you can just move this bishop, and there's no way to stop e7 and e8 besides just sacrificing the rook. So instead of sacrificing the rook, you probably want to sacrifice the bishop, and that's what Jordan does. But this position would be a draw if this e6 pawn wasn't there. But since it is there, and it's very well anchored by this bishop on d7, and these pawns on d6 and d3 and h are all weak, this position is quite an easy win. So after rook f1, king e7, and rook d1, we're collecting this d3 pawn. We try to go after this h5 pawn or d5 pawn, or we can try to play rook f7 and just queen our own pawn normally. So after rook e7, king h4, just going after this pawn. We have d4, king takes h5, rook g7, king h6, and we're just going to go promote our own pawn. And this is where the game ends. He didn't actually play king d5, but yeah, this is where the game ends. This is a very beautiful positional game by Javik here, just showing that he's not only an attacking player, but he's also a very good positional player. And for my last game for today, I want to show you guys Fabiano Caruana versus Wesley So, 2 top-tier elite perennial top 10 players of the world. But they've been somewhat struggling this tournament, especially Fabi. He's not had the best showing so far, but obviously anything can change in the blink of an eye. So we have d4 by Fabi, we have knight f6, c4, e6, and knight c3. Once again, a Nimza Indian. This line is very trendy nowadays. And we have bishop b4, and now we have this f3 move. f3 is known as the schmuck variation, and the point is that white just wants a big white center. And with the center, you just want to overwhelm black. That's the entire point of the opening. And there's a lot of ways to combat this. What I normally play is I like to play d5 in these positions as black, and after, for example, a3, you can just play bishop e7. And this is the kind of position I like, that you play c5. And the point is, the computer may not like this as much, but after, for example, castle on bishop d6, it's very hard for white to get an advantage in this type of position. Because first of all, it's kind of rare, and second of all, you have a very Benoni-like structure without any of the problems of a Benoni, and white's king is quite open. But instead, Wesley opts for this line c5, which is also a great line. There's nothing wrong with it. And after d5, b5, this line is a lot more sharp, however. And after e4, this is very well-known theory. I probably shouldn't get into the intricacies of this because I'm not too well versed in them. But the point is that black is trying to chip away at the c4 at this d5 pawn, try to open up the position and try to attack white's king. So if d6, bishop d2, take, and b4, locking the position because you traded a bishop for the knight. And now you want to lock the position so that the bishops don't get too powerful. So after bishop d2, castle, knight e2, take on d5, and knight h5. This is also a very thematic move. You want to open up this queen. You want to play f5 in this type of position, just striking at the e4 pawn. And this is a very, very nice position for Wesley So, and a position that Fabiano Caruana has displayed. So we have queen b3 in this position, and I probably can't explain this move. I don't understand why Fabi played this. I might assume that he wanted to play a3 in this position and try to take back maybe with like a rook and have a presence on both the a and b files, but I probably don't know. Or maybe after, I guess, bishop b7 and after a3 you can't take. I guess that may have been his intention, but I'm not too sure, to be honest. So Wesley just plays a very nice move f5, and the point is, the reason why this is so nice is that after you take, you don't take back. The reason is if you take back, this move g4, and this type of position is very double-edged. Like, this is like very hard to evaluate for either side. I don't think Wesley wants to go for this type of position when he has such a comfortable position right now. And f5 is just a temporary pawn sacrifice because you can't really ever play g4 in the future because you'll just be opening up queen h4 ideas in the future. So after f5, take, and knight d7, you just want to put your knight on e5, and then you can take, because you can't play g4 because this f3 pawn will be weak. Or you can play as well this a5, a4 idea. Either one is beautiful for black. So we have g4s from Fabi, and he might still be in prep by judging how fast he's playing, but I think he may have confused his lines because this is not a good position for white. And here, Wesley plays this move 95, a beautiful move, but unfortunately given as a mistake by the computer. But he should have probably just played Queen H4, and then after King D1, then play 95. And there's a huge difference in these, because if you see what happens in the game after 95, it transposes into a very similar line. But if white played this move knight G3 in this position, which tries to trade off these knights and just play King G, Bishop G2 and castle, this pawn majority is not going away anywhere, and this is very hard for black to chip away at this. So the reason why Queen H4 was so important in this position is that you can't play Knight G3. That you're stopping this trade, you're stopping this maneuver, and that after you play here, then you should play Knight E5, because now if you just play this move, Bishop takes F5, and this king is out of play. No, not even out of play. It's very weak, because you can just move the bishop to d3 to take on f3. This position is just collapsing for white, and there's no knight to like trade off. It's very, very bad position, and the pawn is not worth it in this case. But with what happens in the game with knight e5, Fabi blunders by calling Wesley's bluff and taking. Spends 10 minutes on this move, and the problem is you can just take the pawn and you're attacking this. And I'm not too sure why Wesley didn't play this. I think he may not have liked the position after f4, but then I think he may have missed c4. The point is after c4, you can't play queen takes b4 because of knight d3 check, which is a fork of the king and queen. And so we have take. So after take on f5, knight d7, g4, knight e5, which is a very nice move. I can't lie. Like, besides this move knight g3, which is combating it, which is very hard to see, very hard to spot, it's a very, very tricky move for white to encounter. So after take c4, which is a very similar idea as I've shown before. The point is, if you take, then there's knight d3, and after queen e3, you can play knight d3, take on b2, play this move c3, and you're essentially killing these two pieces off because they have no future prospects, and you're opening up this d3 square for the bishop to use in the future via this route, or playing bishop f5 check and getting it through this route. And this position is very bad for white. And Fabi finds one saving grace, however, which is his move knight d4. And here, the Wesley plays queen f6, which is a mistake. So after knight d4, the point is you can't take on d2 because white will take on b2, and white is relatively safe here because there's no attack once you get to this side. There's only an attack because there's so many pawns near the white king that it's restricting so many squares of the king and its other pieces. And after knight d4, maybe black should have just taken on f5, which is a very hard move to see in hindsight. The point is that after you take, and queen e6, you can just play rook f7. And even though this position, you do feel like you're pinned, you're kind of going into the wrong direction, treading in the wrong direction, you're not attacking, you're the one who's pinned, white really does have a move in this position. For example, the computer says the only move in this position is the move bishop h6. And the point, I guess, would just be that you're threatening rook g1 and you're threatening to take. And, well, you can't take here, pretty obviously, because of rook g1 and then queen h6, but this is like such a shot out of the blue that it's so tough to see. And like any normal person, I think, would probably play a move such as like maybe bishop b5, trying to develop the bishop, or play rook g1. And the point is, after rook g1, for example, now black is tending to take on d2. And this is the part that I think Wesley would have missed because it's very hard to see. Because after you take, and you play this move queen to a5, and the point is that you've distracted this queen away from the e3 square, and now you're threatening queen a3, and you're threatening this pawn on f3 in the future, and you're also threatening rook c8 and rook c3, and also you're threatening the queen very, very soon. So that's the reason. That's like the small difference is that the queen's on e6 and not e3. So after knight d4, we have queen f6, which is a mistake. Because of just queen f4, just defending everything. But Fabi doesn't play it. Fabi kind of misevaluates after take. His king may not be the safest in the position, but unfortunately for him, there's no queen a5 check, queen a5, So it's not the best for him. But after bishop d2 and bishop d7, this is also really bad because you're allowing this light squared bishop to get into the game, and it's a very strong attacking piece that white can't really combat yet, even though it does have a light squared bishop. It's just not doing anything for right now. And you can't really even trade it because if you play bishop b5, you can play take, and rook a8, and you're just getting into the white position. So here, we have this move, bishop takes, knight, and we have rook f8, trying to just gain access to the open file. We have bishop a4 and rook e1. And the point is of this line is that rook e1 is a temporary sacrifice. The point is you can't play queen takes e1. You just can't because the queen takes d4. And you have way too many threats. You're getting threatened with c2. You're getting threatened with, just c2 is the main problem, and there's no way to stop it. Because the only way that you can try to stop it, maybe play queen c1, and then after c2, you're just losing your queen. But rook e1 is just a really beautiful move, but there's this move bishop c1, unfortunately. But after bishop c1, you have rook a8, and this position is just so sad for white. You have 5 out of your 7 pieces on your back rank. You're getting attacked mercilessly by this white position, but there's still hope in this position. And Fabi finds it with this move bishop b5. And the point is that you're attacking this rook and you're attacking this rook. Quite simple. But you can't really afford losing more material as black. Because even though you have a raging attack, you need material to attack. And this move kind of forces a trade of rooks, or it forces an unpleasant endgame. So we have rook h1 and bishop a4. Now bishop a4 is a blunder because you're allowing this rook to get way too active in the position. A better move would most likely have been to take, and this move is extremely hard to play, especially with the time situation that Fabi had, because normally we're taught that a bishop is better than an exchange. However, in this position, something that Fabi needed to also understand is that in this case, the rook is a lot more powerful than this bishop, because if you can get down to this first rank, there's not a lot you can do to defend this bishop. And the endgame that you get after you play take, rook e1, king c2 is not a good one, because after rook hf1, you need to sack the queen. And if you don't sack the queen, for example, you play a move such as queen g3, there's just queen d4, threatening queen d1, and there's no way to stop checkmate. So after here, you have to sack the queen, you have to play king d3, and this is very, very interesting to balance, in my opinion. You have 3 pieces for the queen, but in these kind of positions, if you're the player with the 3 pieces, you want your pieces to be well coordinated, you want your king to be safe, you want your pawn structure to be nice, and white has none of those. That's why the queen is so much better in this position. And because the queen is so much more active, this rook is so much more active than this rook. It's just that black has everything working for them in their favor. So black Wesley plays c2, which I actually don't understand at all. I feel like that's just a blunder of a pawn after bishop c2. I guess Wesley wanted to win this pawn on f3 and exchange rooks, and c2 kind of forces his hand in that, because after you take on f3, he thought that taking may have been mandatory, but there's this move bishop e3, which I don't know why Fabi didn't play. I guess it's kind of unpleasant pinning yourself and subjecting yourself to like queen g5 moves, but there's just, queen g5 is not a good move. This knight's hanging. Like rook h3, queen g5 in the future, just subjecting yourself to this may not be the best, but it's still the best option because you're not exchanging rooks. Exchanging rooks in this position is essentially a death wish, because after queen takes a1, so black first place, queen's c3, but after queen a1, king d1, this pawn structure is just so hard to defend, and Wesley does a beautiful job just cleaning up all these pawns. And he starts with queen takes a2, and then follows it up with a5 and queen a1. And the point is, you're just playing a4 and b3 and b2, and the game is over. And this is just the last desperate measure. And Wesley cleans this position up with a very nice staircase a little later after a4, b3, and after this position, he now needs to win these pawns. That's the entire point. If you can win the h2 pawn and the h6 pawn, your h pawn will win the game for you in a very easy and non-complicated fashion for black. So we have queen c3, bishop c2, queen f3, king d2, queen f4, and what Wesley's trying to do is that he's just trying to win this h6 pawn, but he's trying to do it in a manner where he gives all these checks and then he takes it, because then you can take this h2 pawn with check as well. The point is, if you get your queen to h5, you can also win this pawn and this pawn at the same time. So you're getting two in the price of one. So after king d1, queen g4, king d2, queen g5, king d1, queen h5. Now the point is, you're starting to win this. You're starting to win this pawn in check, and you really don't want that to happen this way, but you're kind of forced into it, because after king e1, you can just put queen to h2, and you're forced to give up another tempo, trying to defend one of these bishops, and then you can take this pawn on h6, and then you have an easy way to promote. So after bishop h2, g8-6, bishop d3, and h5, this is where Fabiano Caruana decided to throw in the towel and resign this position. Well, this is some of my favorite games from the St. Louis Rapid tournament so far. I will upload another one of my favorite Blitz games a little later, and then I will do a full video covering the entire tournament. Well, that's all I have for today. Thank you, everyone. Please subscribe. Bye-bye.